like to thank Michael, the man behind the curtain, kind of here, who inspired me to come talk to you guys today. He kind of set this thing up, and he thought that I'd fit in here, even though I'm doing something a little bit different than probably all the other presentations that you're going to be seeing here.
Michael's always right.
Yeah, that's a very good point. He's been inspiration to me lately to pursue my ideas, even though sometimes I wonder if I'm still sane when I'm talking to myself and I think, well, what am I really doing with this project here? But basically, what I've been doing lately is trying to educate the public about urban foraging and how it has applications today in our society, even though we look back on hunter-gatherer times as something that's an antiquated past, thousands of years ago. We evolved from that. We learned ways to irrigate crops. We developed all kinds of agricultural systems that support whatever way of life we decide to make for ourselves. And we've gotten away from our place in the environment. But now it's coming full circle nowadays with impending crises involving climate change and unsustainable practices in agriculture. And it's a growing problem. So looking back to the past, I think, is one important thing we need to do when looking for sustainable practices in order to continue our existence the way we want it to be. So, while it may seem a little bit off topic, I think the ancient skills of hunter-gatherers have a place right here in the middle of the information age. You're all here because you can relate to agriculture. We're all interested in operating outside of the existing system. So we break into internet security systems to find weaknesses. We analyze ways that software can be abused, right? That's kind of what we're here about. But by extension, if we use this in our approach when looking for ways to improve our means of food production, in both aspects, in respect to both the environmental impact and the quality of the food that we can provide, we really start to see this overlap where we're seeing the beginnings of climate change happen, right? And it's becoming a concern, and the internet community and the tech community is on the forefront of delivering that information to people at the moment. You know, it's in social media, it's in college courses, it's on the cutting edge right now. So when we're dealing with that, we see an overlap in the hunter-gatherer skills to basically use that moving forward to organize our food production system in a way that we can coexist with the environment, reduce our carbon emissions, and still provide people the convenience of our current farming practices are obviously unsustainable. Anyone can tell you that. Netflix can even tell you that. The environmental damage from production of livestock and monocrop agriculture is at best immense. Simultaneously, invasive plants and animal species that are also a man-made problem are multiplying unhindered in the ecosystem. So one simple example of reducing the need for more harmful agricultural practices is utilizing edible invasive species. And we're dealing with a lot of them right now. Daylilies, for instance, is like a food crop that's grown in Asia. Here, it's an ornamental plant. They're called ditch lilies, tiger lilies. They have all kinds of names. But it's an edible plant that just grows wild in ditches on the sides of roads and stuff. And it's pretty much taking over huge portions of woodlands and choking out everything that grows there. It's a delicious edible. You can eat the entire plant from top to bottom. The flower pods are edible. The open flowers are edible. The tubers are edible. They're like a little thing between a potato and a carrot. As you may have noticed, I'm here at CypherCon without a PowerPoint presentation or any other electronic aid and that's kind of my segue into the next section of the speech. I'm also here to talk to you about the fact that while these invasive species are taking over here, and we're wondering how we're going to sustain our agricultural methods in a future where more people are going to need more convenience and more food, we're hurtling into the Anthropocene age here, governed by like human interaction with the environment. And so I'd like to take the opportunity to segue in what I would really like to talk to you about tonight. Being a human in 2019 is full of brand new threats. We live in a comfortable life, perched precariously on the sustainability of our practices, most of which are not sustainable at all. Bear with me, but consider this. I'm not a doomsday prepper. I'm not, I don't have a bunker somewhere. I don't have a bug-out vehicle. But preparedness is becoming a growing fad nowadays, and I think it intersects with pretty much all industries at this point. Imagine relations between the USA and Russia in this scenario deteriorate because of unforeseeable reasons. Basically, any threat could, reduce our food production system to zero at this point. We're talking about astrological events, huge solar storm to knock out the power grid, some kind of organized cyber attack, and it's something that we talk about, like in the news, in the background, and it's still kind of like seen as a fringe idea. But when we're talking about, cybersecurity and how it can protect the future of our information and all of that, I think it really it has a lot to do with what we could potentially be seeing as a massive failure of the system that we rely on right now. And that doesn't necessarily have to come from any kind of outside threat. It could also come from economic stability. If we can no longer sustain the jobs that provide security for industries like producing basically, IT industry jobs that may not be necessary to a affected economy. So imagine that the same things that we've dealt with since the Cold War, the threat of nuclear capabilities escalates to the point of an attack. And several nuclear bombs are detonated high above the United States. Does anybody know what effect that would have? EMP could knock out the existing power grid, so could a very large solar storm would have the same effect. Any number of things that could affect the stability of the power grid could result in difficulty in people getting electricity, water, any normal supplies that we would possibly need. But at the same time, by treating nature as a resource, we can understand that the invasive species that we have introduced into the environment could also be a very useful food source in situations like this. For instance, like I said, I mentioned daylilies. Garlic mustard is another highly invasive species that's taking over large portions of woodland all over the United States currently. And it's actually a very valuable edible. It has high nutrition. It's used as a leafy green. It can be used to make pesto. It can be used to make all kinds of things. It's basically, it tastes something like onion or garlic. However, it also has aspects of like just a leafy green you would put like collard greens. Dame's rocket is another one that's growing all around here, actually, particularly, and really damaging the ecosystem. Dame's rocket. It's a member of the Brassica family, which includes broccoli, cauliflower, and a lot of the leafy greens we find in the grocery store. However, it's also high on the end of dense, nutritious content. That one, it's pretty much rampant all over the place. You can see it like Sorry about that malfunction. You can see it growing on the sides of the roads. It's in every park. It's in every prairie. The seeds are carried by birds, and it's just this big spray of purple flowers. It's edible all times of the year. The whole plant is edible. And it's one of those things we just overlook. We talk about removing invasive species. We try to organize people to form groups and events to try to remove invasive species that we have growing nearby. But really, it's not enough. And I think when people are motivated by hunger, obviously that's going to be a motivator. But if we're motivated by hunger now in a way that's more comfortable, like we want to put food on the table that's both nutritious and really good tasting, we need to start looking into the woods. In order to compete, the species that grow wild have to contain dense amount of nutrients. And it's just part of the selective process naturally. When we try to grow things as crops, we try to grow them the biggest, the juiciest, the highest yield per plant. And we end up with just giant fruits full of water, diluted flavors, and low nutrition content. But when a species actually has to compete in the wild to survive, it has to really contain a lot of dense nutrients in order to be able to provide itself with enough energy to survive. And that translates to nutrition directly. As far as invasive species in the animal family, Asian carp, we're dealing with unimaginable damage to our waterways from Asian carp and other invasive species like lampreys, which if anybody's from around here, Lake Michigan's full of lampreys, and they're destroying fish populations, and they have been for a very long time. The population is more in check now than it has been in the past because of greater control of dams and locks up and down the Wisconsin River and the Mississippi River. But they're still really out of control in general. But Asian carp actually have a real culinary niche that I think people are kind of avoiding. Everyone says the Asian carp, they're just a garbage fish. No one wants to fish with them. No one wants to eat them because they're slandered as this oily fish that nobody wants to eat. But if you prepare it differently, if you're selling as a smoked fish, as dried fish, as other products that are not necessarily a good old-fashioned Wisconsin fish fry, it's a very useful resource and a high source of protein, and it's something that needs to be removed from the environment because humans placed it in. So at the same time that we're removing the problem we created, we're also potentially creating another food source and more jobs for people who are collecting this food. And if that can reduce our reliance on monocrop agriculture and huge confined animal feeding program farms, not even from an ethical standpoint, but just the damage it does to the environment that we're dealing with on a daily basis. I think that would be well worth it. Wild boar, well, it's a little less common in this area across the southern United States. It's a real problem. Pigs get loose from farms and go feral and become wild boar. We created that invasive species issue, and they're pigs. We could be organizing people to go collect all of these, getting them out of our environment in ways that we're not doing now. It's just basically hunters. We're relying on hunters to do it, and they're not getting all of it. So if we wanted to remove them all, we could supplement our reliance on pork farms. And that would also be a good thing moving forward as far as CO2 emissions, damage to waterways near farms and all that. And then when we get into if society doesn't exist someday as we know it, and you can't go to a grocery store to find what you need, there's plenty of species available that we would be already used to buying and storing, growing outside. It's an easy transition at that point. And then you can get further into like native species that are highly productive and they need no care. And then you get into themes of like basically forest agriculture or permaculture. So crops that need no care. You just leave them alone and they'll produce. You just harvest them whenever they're ready. And there's no real farming techniques needed except for harvesting. That's another low labor, less intensive way of farming that doesn't damage the landscape as well. Things like elderberry. Every year I go out and I collect cuttings of elderberry. Those are, they can be slightly invasive in certain situations. They're a very hardy plant, but they're a native plant. So they exist in the ecosystem with sort of a buffer. Eventually their population carrying capacity is reached and they don't spread it. So that's a safe plant to use that exists already as a food source. That'll grow without any care whatsoever. Okay. At this point, I'm probably just going to move on to questions. If anybody has any questions about what I was talking about so far.
What about zebra mussels?
Zebra mussels. Low edibility potential because of their size, basically. They're very, very small. The problem that we're having with those is that they're taking over lakes and rivers all over the Midwest right now. And they're transported by boats. So far, pretty much every waterway in the area already is infested with them. And they're already there. We're just hoping that they don't do as much damage as we think they will. They filter pretty much everything out of the water. So you're dealing with a population boom that results in, they'll thrive in polluted water because there's so many nutrients from that pollution in the water. And then because the population grows so much, they clean everything out of the water and there's no nutrients left for any of the native species. Unfortunately, we can't really use that as a food source, but finding a way to remove that is very important. So far we've been pretty unsuccessful.
Are there any, I guess, commercial organizations or private or whatever that go forth and harvest this stuff so the person will have to purchase it?
Yes.
Going out in the woods themselves?
Yes, absolutely. It's actually kind of a growing thing in past decades. Foraged foods have found their ways into grocery stores. You'll see morel mushrooms every spring. Sometimes they'll get up to like $80 a pound at the grocery store. They're like highly coveted wild mushrooms that are only harvested by foragers because they can't be cultivated. There's products like that. Also wild leeks called ramps. Those are in season right now. And those will sometimes find their ways into the existing grocery store system. Usually you'll find them at like co-ops and like natural food stores. The larger stores sometimes carry rare mushrooms, but otherwise, for the most part, everything is cultivated. There's a big potential to start changing that. Restaurant supply is where it's at right now as far as foraged foods. The grocery store or markets that offer this, maybe a farmer's market would be the best place to look, but otherwise, chefs will use foraged foods more than anyone else. The biggest industry in foraged foods right now is restaurants. Restaurants that want to do seasonal foods and local foods, particularly.
Have you looked into just plain edible grass? Because I read that there's a couple just regular grass that actually has just everything you need.
Yeah, I agree. Edible turf is a thing, and it's something to think about too when we're talking about permaculture. Basically, plants and fungi that don't need any care whatsoever in order to provide you with food. You can go out in the backyard and mow your lawn and make a salad, right? You can go out in your garden and pick, fruit from your trees that are just naturally growing there, and you plot month by month what's going to be harvestable, so that you always have some food available. That's kind of the idea with permaculture. Yeah, the edible turf. I think that's a great idea. A lot of it's made like with clover, chicory, and a few other things.